everyone. My name is Easy, and welcome to another episode of Easy Does It, where we do reactions and reviews to YouTube channels and sometimes some daily vlogs. Now this week we're going to check out a channel called Be Amazed. They've had about 4 billion views. They've been on for quite a while, since 2015. That's a good while. Over time, they've racked up about 11.5 million subscribers. So that's pretty damn good. Now, Be Amazed is a channel that pretty much focuses on like weird, bizarre, strange facts, events, humorous crap. Like dumb criminals. The mysteries. Just bizarre coincidences. That kind of stuff. Just random stuff. We're gonna check out one of their videos called Strangest Historical Coincidence That Can't Be Explained.
Human history has only been recorded for the last 5,000 years, a fraction of the 80,000 years we've been knocking around on this planet. And in that short space of time since history began, we've packed in a whole lot. From empires rising and falling, to space travel, to the creation of the internet's busiest monkey cage, YouTube. Nevertheless, even in those 5 busy millennia, a strange pattern has started to emerge. Every 100 years, a fatal and infectious event has struck like clockwork. It's hit in 1720, 1820, 1920, and the infamous 2020. That just can't be a coincidence, can it? Well, grab your hazmat suits, because we're going to explore some of the most contagious and strangest historical coincidences of all time. Let's begin in the year 1720 in the French city of Marseille, where the locals were suddenly struck down by a grotesque sickness. Pus-filled black boils the size of eggs erupted in their armpits, groins, and necks. These super gross symptoms were also accompanied by vomiting and high fevers. What a combo! This is the dreaded bubonic plague, a bacterial infection spread by the bite of the common flea. It's a sickness that's really made a mark on human history, decimating populations all over Europe in pandemics back in the 6th and 14th centuries. But this particular outbreak of plague in the 18th century would result in the deaths of some 100,000 people in the city of Marseille and the surrounding provinces. It was such a deadly event it became known as the Great Plague of Marseille. However, this outbreak was tiny compared to the pandemic that ran rampant through Eurasia only 100 years later. In the year 1820, most of South Asia was infected with cholera. Cholera is a bacterial infection of the small intestine which causes the body to expel large amounts of watery diarrhea.
Some bad shit.
And this non-stop pooping can be deadly, as your body loses a huge volume of water, resulting in dangerous levels of dehydration within hours. Cholera is spread through dirty water or undercooked food which has been in contact with infected human feces. Blech. Undercooked shellfish are a common source of infection, so always make sure your prawns are pink all the way through. Otherwise, you're in for a crippling time on the toilet. Fortunately, in the 21st century, we have antibiotic treatments to cure cholera. But back during the South Asian pandemic of 1820, this outbreak of cholera resulted in 3.2 million deaths.
Wow.
The colossal death toll was due to the fact that this pandemic has spread further than any other. It originated in the Indian city of Calcutta, but spread as far as China and the Mediterranean.
That's not surprising.
However,
a lot of your
Eastern
countries,
that shook the world. The date, 1920.
Not to talk too bad about them, but you've seen videos where they just shit wherever on the side of the road and crap like that. It's just nasty.
From the aftermath of World War I, when it was hit with one of the deadliest pandemics of all time. It was known as the Spanish flu and was a strain of influenza that successfully infected 500 million people. a third
Because
of the
it
global
came
population at
from
the time. And this flu
Spain.
wasn't just a bad case of the sniffles that could be cured with chicken soup. Rather, it was a virus that triggered cytokine storm in the immune systems of young adults. A cytokine storm is
You
when
always
the
name
immune
it where
system
it
goes
comes
into
from.
overdrive, releasing a huge surge of proteins known as cytokines, which flood the body. This condition can be life-threatening and result in multiple organ failure.
You don't give it
Ultimately,
a number and
Spanish
say,
flu was
hey,
recorded
it's
at
the
that time
19th
estimated to be between
version
17
of this
million to 50 million. Though other historians argue its
virus.
death toll could be as
That
high
was
as
so
100
stupid.
million. Without a doubt, it was one of the deadliest pandemics of all time. Now, with modern medicine and annual flu vaccinations, some might have believed the Spanish flu would be the last worldwide pandemic. But then the curse of the 20s struck again. As you probably remember, in 2020, the whole world was hit by the COVID-19 pandemic. Though the virus
See?
itself wasn't
No, it's
particularly
not
compared to
called
other
that.
pandemics
That's
on
the
this list,
strain,
Spanish
you
flu, it
idiots.
was by far the most transmissible.
It's
The
the
virus
China
jumped
V.
borders and crossed oceans, spreading through the human population like wildfire. In total, a jaw-dropping 655 million cases were recorded worldwide. And for those with underlying health
Yes,
issues,
and we
or
now
compromised
know
immune
that
systems,
the
getting ill with
majority of
COVID
them
often
cases
proved fatal, sadly resulting in
was
some
falsified.
6.6 million deaths. Due to COVID's highly infectious nature,
Yeah,
with no
but them
immediately
deaths were
available
not
vaccine,
due
many
to
governments
the
issued
China
lockdown
V,
orders,
the
and
vast
citizens of many
majority of
nations
them.
forced to stay in
There
their homes
really
with
wasn't a
minimal social
pandemic.
contact
It
for
was a
over
lie.
year.
It's
My
all come
God,
out,
was it
and
dull.
they've all
I
said
was
it.
so bored I watched the entire back catalog of
It was
Netflix,
a complete
even its
lie.
terrible dating shows. However, watching Love is Blind made me want to go blind. But that wasn't the only disappointment during lockdown, as even when the stay-at-home orders lifted, the COVID-19 virus still hung around. Fortunately, these days many of us are vaccinated and can fight off infection. But given the pattern we've discovered, does that mean the world is due for an even deadlier pandemic in 2120? I mean, it seems
It
the world
wouldn't
is destined to
surprise
suffer from a
me.
global pandemic every
These
100 years.
governments,
At least
they
that's
like
what
to
an article
experiment
headlines all
on
over the
people.
internet would have you believe. But it turns out that
I
this
mean,
entire
Mr. Bill
concept is a
Gates
total historical
and George
hoax. To
Soros
break us
and
down, first we need to address
WEF
what a
and
pandemic
China,
actually
they've all
is.
come out and
A
said
pandemic is
they need to
defined as a
cull the
disease that is spread over
population.
multiple countries or continents.
They want
Therefore,
to,
that rules out the Great
because
Plague of
too many
Marseille as a
people are using
pandemic.
up
Rather, it was
rich
an
people's
epidemic, as it
resources.
was a disease that affected a large number of people, but only within the borders of France. As for the 1820 cholera
That's a
outbreak,
fact.
which did cross
So
international borders, therefore making it a pandemic, the outbreak actually began in 1817 and continued until 1824. Meanwhile, the Spanish
most
flu
of the
pandemic
deaths
actually
were
began in 1918 and ended in 1920.
due
And
to
it's not
doctors
just the
being
dates that are
told
wrong, but the names of the
just to
pandemic
mark
too. Even
everything
though this deadly
as
disease was known
China
as Spanish
V,
flu, modern scientists have tracked the source
even
of
if it
this
wasn't.
particular influenza strain to the heart of the southern
So that's
U.S.
how you
in
get
Fort
them
Riley
big
in
numbers,
Kansas. The disease only became
because
known
over
as
half of
Spanish
them
flu
was
as
not
Spanish
related to the
newspapers were
China
the
V.
only
They
ones
were
who freely
actually
reported on the
deaths
pandemic at the time.
uh,
Other countries, the U.S. included,
by
had
other
wartime censorships in
means,
place that suppressed any bad
not the
news
China
stories to
V.
maintain morale. Meanwhile,
It's all a
Spain
big
was neutral
lie.
in the war. As a result, the disease gained the nickname Spanish flu, though it would be more accurate to call it the Kansas flu, which sounds like the sort of fever you'd have where you'd hallucinate visiting the Wizard of Oz. Now for the last piece of flimsy evidence for this historical hoax, the COVID-19 pandemic. There's no denying this pandemic did force us to stay in our homes and listen to the terrible off-tune singing of bored celebrities.
No, it was a lie.
However, the actual first cases of this previously unknown strain of coronavirus were reported to the World Health Organization from Wuhan City in China on 31st December 2019.
That's why it's called the China V.
Hence, this strain of coronavirus is called COVID-19.
See, string.
Here it was first identified.
It's part of the string.
Technically, the COVID-19
He's right about
pandemic
that.
has yet to end, having evolved into different
He's
strains
right about
such as
where it
Alpha,
came from.
Epsilon, Theta, Kappa, and Omicron. This disease
And we've
has had no
already
comebacks,
we've
no
already
doubt.
seen the evidence
But
that they were
COVID-19 hasn't been
experimenting.
the only viral celebrity of the 21st century. Rather huge areas of West Africa were overrun with the
Dr.
Ebola virus epidemic between 2014 to
Fusco,
2016.
Fauci,
Brazil
or
was
whatever the
severely
fuck his
impacted
name
by the
is.
Zika
I
virus
could care
epidemic
less.
between 2015 to 2016. Therefore,
Yeah.
though this pandemic meme would like you to
Already
believe
came
that
out
disease
and
outbreaks
said
occur
that
precisely every
everything
100
that you
years,
were told
history is
before it
never
even
that
hit
Rather,
was true.
pandemic outbreaks are far more random and often caused by unsanitary
Governments
close
lied.
contact between
Democrats
animals such as
lied.
bats and humans, causing pathogens to jump from one species to the other. Whilst in our ever more interconnected world with transport and trade links, diseases
WHO
have
and
never been able to spread
CDC
across
said there
continents so
was no
easily.
reason for
So we
lockdowns.
simply can't predict
They didn't
when
need
the next
masks,
global
blah, blah,
pandemic will
blah.
strike.
They were lying
Better
out
be
their
prepared.
ass.
You can always have your
And now they
sanitizer
want
spray
everybody
at
to
the ready.
forgive them.
Now, if this video has successfully made you a total germaphobe, hit that like button. Don't worry, the rest of this video is entirely disease-free, as we'll be diving into more bizarre historical
About damn time.
coincidences. But before we get to that, why not hit that subscribe
I thought
button
this was
too?
supposed to be about
I promise it's been
coincidences.
completely sanitized.
It had nothing
All
to
done?
do with
Great.
coincidences.
Now let's see what other even stranger coincidences have cropped up in history.
That wasn't a coincidence.
Tomato.
It was just about
In 1788, the
diseases.
first British settlers arrived in Australia, and a few deadly bites later, they soon discovered how dangerous its wildlife is. But of course, the British weren't the first to arrive. Australia has been populated by the Aboriginal tribes for centuries. European culture and Aboriginal cultures have developed independently with different practices, beliefs, and languages. True to this, Aboriginal peoples had their own unique vocabulary, worlds away from English. Or at least that's what linguists thought until 1964. It was this year that one linguist professor, Robert M.W. Dixon, committed himself to the study of the language of the Mbambaram, who were native to Queensland in northeastern Australia. Now here's a crash course in linguistics. In order to study a new language, you usually begin with basic nouns. You might point to different objects in a room and call them a table or a chair, for example. To
Right.
learn these words, Professor Dixon would regularly meet with a native speaker of Mbambaram, known as Albert Bennett. In their first meeting, the professor only recorded 28 words, but over the course of 5 months, he learned 250 words and 300 short sentences. Though imagine the professor's surprise when in one such meeting he requested the word for dog and got the exact same response. Dog. Professor Dixon at first thought Albert had gotten mixed up with his English, but when he repeated the question, pointing to the pupper, he got the same response. Dog. By complete coincidence, the pronunciation of the Mbambaram word is identical to the English version. But there was no discernible relationship between Mbambaram and English, and the countries are almost 10,000 miles apart. It truly was a wild coincidence. Sometimes the world is just barking mad.
Huh. That is
fruitful
weird if
meal.
it's true.
Have you ever dealt with a
Now,
case
see,
of
that's a
mistaken identity,
coincidence.
where someone comes up to you and is
That
sure
first
they
part
recognize
about
you
the
from somewhere?
diseases
But did you
had
know
nothing
that
to
the
do with
chances of someone
coincidence.
being your perfect doppelganger is
And he
about
got
1 in
some of
1
it wrong.
trillion? Crazy, right? But that's not even as impossible as the odds of what supposedly happened to King Umberto I of Italy. On July 28, 1900, it's claimed that King Umberto decided to go for dinner in the city of Monza. He was joined by his trusted assistant, and the pair chose a random local restaurant to dine in. They were enjoying their meal when, as is customary, the owner of the restaurant came out to greet the prestigious guests. But as King Umberto looked up, he thought the restaurant owner was holding up a mirror, because unbelievably the restaurant owner and King Umberto looked exactly alike. They were a pair of real-life doppelgangers. The uncanny resemblance didn't just end with the men's appearance. The restaurant owner was also called Umberto, and both men had been born on the exact same day in the city of Turin. But it gets even spookier, as both men had married on the same day, both to women named Margherita. Even more astonishingly, the second
Now, this
Umberto
isn't
had
the
opened
first
his
time I've
restaurant on
heard
the exact
stories
same
like
day
this
of King Umberto's coronation,
about a
and both
doppelganger
had sons named Vittorio.
or a
The two
twin
men
that they
couldn't
didn't
believe
know
the stunning
about.
set of coincidences they shared. They were almost too similar. The meeting was so strange that the king decided to meet the other Umberto the very next day to further discuss the similarities between them. Though tragically, the restaurant owner died the next morning after being shot in unexplained circumstances. But in a shocking twist of fate,
What the
King
hell?
Umberto himself was also assassinated in a shooting
Ah.
incident. Now, one popular theory is that the two Umbertos were actually twins that had been separated at birth.
Right.
Furthermore, it's thought that King Umberto's assassin, an
That's just-
Italian-American anarchist known as
that's
Gaetano
ridiculous.
Bresci, had also attended the restaurant that fateful night. Gaetano had possibly seen the identical Umbertos and assumed, to be on the safe side, that he should take out both men.
Ha!
However, despite all my digging, I couldn't find a single reputable source from this time that backed this story up. While I want to believe Umberto found his doppelganger, I wonder if their sons and wives really had the same names or if they really shared a birthday. Either way,
It's
without
happened
proofs,
before.
This one is just a historical
It's not
rumor,
surprising.
and a killer rumor at that.
Now, whether that story's true or
Bye-bye,
not,
baby.
I don't know.
Can you imagine
But it
walking
has.
down the street when all of a
Them
sudden
kind
it
of
starts
stories
raining
have
money?
happened.
Now that would be a sweet green miracle. But in the case of Joseph Figlock, the miracle that fell out of the sky gave him more of a fright. When Joseph was walking down a neighborhood street in Detroit in the 1930s, he heard a wail and looked up to see a falling baby. Thankfully, Joseph caught the baby and the day was saved. But by some wacky coincidence, 1 year later, Joseph found himself in Groundhog Day as he caught the same baby falling from a window again. Or at least that's how the story is told, as urban legends such as this tend to take on a life of their own. You see, Joseph was a street worker, which is why he spent so many of his days out on the sidewalk. And he did in fact catch 2 young children falling out of windows. However, it was 2 separate children at different locations. The first being a baby girl and the second being a
still, that's
boy.
That's
Joseph
crazy.
Didn't so much catch the babies, rather they landed.
There's always some
So
truth
Joseph
sometimes to
Whitman,
an
full
urban
little
legend
child
or
made a
something,
fatal
you
end
know.
on the concrete sidewalk.
Like it may
But
not
why
be
were there so
completely
many babies
true,
falling out
but
of windows? Well, that
you
was
know,
the
there
result
might
of an
be some
insane
kind of
baby
fact
cage
in
trend
there.
that literally swept the nation. The parenting myth at the time was that babies needed to be aired for their health, and so
Yeah, I've heard of that
ignorant
stuff.
parents literally
It was
hung up
dumb.
chicken wire
That was
cages outside
really
their
dumb.
apartments to air their babies.
That they actually
The trend was
did that
popularized
crap.
by President Roosevelt's wife Eleanor, who hung a baby cage outside her New York City apartment to place her daughter in for naps. Because
Wow.
what better way to ensure your baby has a peaceful sleep than to hang them out a window 4 stories high,
Yeah,
breathing in the city's air
that's
pollution.
ridiculous.
Thankfully, in the 1950s, people finally came to their senses and realized that babies and heights don't mix.
You
Forget the
think?
baby boomers. The generation before were baby droppers. First and last. World War I was one of the deadliest conflicts in all of human history,
Nah.
with 20 million deaths and 21 million
You don't
people
say.
wounded all over the globe. You might think after such a catastrophic death toll the world would learn its lesson, that it would be the war to end all wars. But of course, we all know how history turned out. It's called World War I for a reason. However, there is a chilling coincidence linked to the Saint Symphorien military cemetery in Belgium, where many of the fallen British soldiers of World War I are buried. As without any deliberate planning, the first recorded British casualty of the war, 17-year-old soldier John Parr, is buried just 15 feet away from the last recorded casualty, 30-year-old George Ellison. The 2 graves even face one another, like haunting bookends of the war. Private John Parr's death was recorded just 17 days after Britain declared war, whilst Private George Ellison died just 90 minutes before armistice was declared. A morbid reminder of the cost of war, but a testament to the fact that war does end eventually. Double take. We all like to think we're unique, but what if there was someone else out there who'd lived your exact same life? Well, that's exactly what happened to 2 twin boys put up for adoption separately in 1940 and only 3 weeks old. Both sets of adoptive parents named the boys James, though they both went by Jim instead. Both Jims had beloved childhood dogs, both named Toy. And at school they both excelled at math and woodworking, but neither had a knack for spelling.
Again,
As adults,
this is
both Jims were heavy smokers,
the
drove
twin
the same Chevrolet car, and even vacationed at
scenario.
the same Florida beach.
Similar
They even had
stories
identical
like the
tastes in
other
women,
one
as both Jims
with the
married women named
doppelganger
Linda,
twins
though
or
neither
whatever.
marriage worked out, and instead both men divorced and
You-
went on to marry a
You
pair
hear
of
this
days.
shit all the time.
Nevertheless, the creepy
with twins.
coincidences of the Jim twins even carried on to the next generation, as both men named their sons James Allen. This train of coincidences just ain't stopping. Eventually, at age 37, one of the Jims was able to get the contact details of his twin brother through the Ohio courthouse. He tracked him down and the pair spoke on the phone, eventually agreeing to meet. But it wasn't until February 9th, 1979, the Jim twins were finally reunited. From baby boys to full-grown men, it was practically impossible to tell them apart. Given the striking similarities between the lives they had led, they were invited to take part in a study conducted at the University of Minnesota. The study found that their medical histories and brainwave tests were almost identical, and so were the results of their personality
That's
tests.
not
So
surprising.
is that the whole nature versus nurture debate?
They have
completely
a thing
settled
to
then?
do with
Does our
twins.
DNA determine our entire personality over the environment we're raised in after all? Well, it's worth noting that the two gems only grew up 40 miles apart from each other in small Midwestern towns, so they were raised with the same suburban American culture of apple pies and white picket fences. And it's likely that if one of the boys had been adopted internationally, things might have turned out differently. But you know, even I've been hearing rumors that there might be some international versions of me out there. Ha! Could you imagine? She'll see you later. Crossing the ocean used to be a pretty dangerous affair, and there are enough shipwrecks at the bottom of the seafloor to prove it. That's why sailors have developed a whole horde of superstitions over the years, such as never
A
whistling
lot
into
of
the wind in
superstitions
case you conjure up
when
a
it
storm.
comes to the
Though
sea.
one of the strictest rules of all was to never set sail
seafarers.
with a woman on board, as
Sailors,
they'll
whatever.
make the sea angry. Seems like a load of old nonsense. However, after hearing about Miss Violet Jessup, perhaps there was reason to this superstition after all. Violet was originally born in Argentina to Irish immigrant parents. To support her family, she became a stewardess for the Royal Mail Line Shipping Company and was assigned to the RMS Olympic in 1911, the largest civilian liner ship at the time. However, it wasn't all smooth sailing, as Violet found out on the 20th of September 1911 when the RMS Olympic collided with the HMS Hawk warship. The two ships were sailing parallel to each other through the Solent, a
Okay,
small
I
stretch
started
of
to
water
say-
between southern England and the Isle of Wight. However, when the RMS Olympic turned right, the ship swung into the path
What
of the
the-
HMS Hawk. The Hawk's captain couldn't steer the warship away in time before its hull crashed into the Olympic's starboard side.
Well, that
Two
makes no
giant
sense.
gaping holes were ripped into
Captain
the ship's
fired.
hull, and its compartments took on water. However, miraculously, the Olympic managed to stay afloat and sailed back to port for repairs with no one harmed in the crash. Following this,
Wow.
Violet was assigned to sail aboard the Olympic sister ship, the RMS Titanic. And at the time, this was ironically known as the Unsinkable Ship. Though, as
Right.
most of you probably know, the Titanic is the most famous ship to ever sink. The
Right.
Titanic struck an iceberg on the 15th of April 1912, which ripped open the ship's starboard side and caused it to sink to its watery grave at the bottom of the North Atlantic.
Yep.
Though the giant iceberg wasn't the only thing the ship's crew overlooked. Shockingly, the Titanic was only equipped with 20 lifeboats for a total carrying capacity of 1,176 people, which was barely over half the total of 2,224 people sailing aboard the Titanic. But that's because the lifeboats were only designed to ferry people to nearby rescue ships, rather than as a complete evacuation measure. Though tragically, the Titanic sank rapidly before any nearby ships could come to its rescue. Fortunately, Violet was one of the few who managed to get into a lifeboat and survived, though more than 1,500 people lost
I think
their
I've
lives
heard
to
of
the
this
disaster.
woman
Now,
before.
you'd think 2 shipwrecks is enough of an
She
unlucky
survived
streak
like
to never
3 or
set
4.
foot in a paddling pool, let alone the ocean again. But Violet was unfazed, and
Yeah.
she went on to serve
Yeah,
upon the
I think
HMS
this is the
Britannic.
one where she's.
During World
I
War
think I've
I, it was
heard that-
refitted
about
as a
this
hospital ship,
woman
and Violet
before.
served on board as a British Red Cross nurse.
Yeah.
But on November 21st, 1916, the ship
Yep.
was struck by a sea mine
Another
planted by a
ship.
German U-boat in the Aegean
Now,
Sea.
there are actually
Explosion
similar
rocked the ship,
stories
causing such
where
extensive
people
damage
have
that, you guessed it,
escaped
the Britannic
like
sank
3
in
or
less
4
than an hour.
coincidences
But having learned
where
from
they
the
almost
tragedy of
get
the Titanic,
killed
the boat was equipped with far more lifeboats,
by doing
and
the
as a
same
result,
thing.
There were only 30 casualties out of 1,030 survivors. Despite her string of shipwrecks, Violet kept working on cruise ships for the rest of her 42-year-long career.
It's
This
crazy.
woman knew no fear, but I'm sure other passengers would get super nervous when they discovered the infamous Violet Jessup was on board. However, it's
You would
not
think
fair
someone
to
like-
lay
like
the
that
blame of
would
the
take the
shipwreck
hint.
curse upon Violet, despite having sailed on 3 ships that sunk. There's a far more important common denominator. All 3 of these ships, the Olympic, Titanic, and Britannic, were all owned by the White Star Line Company as part of their Olympic class of steamships. Maybe they should have spent longer on the design process before putting these ships out to sea, because it turned out that the Titanic was never the unsinkable one. It was Miss Violet Jessup all along.
Ha ha ha.
Shock horror. They say that art imitates life, but what
Yeah,
if
you're
art
trying
could
to be funny
predict
now.
life? It sure would be fun if we could have Iron Man's cool gadgets or explore the galaxy like Han Solo. But unfortunately, the only time real life was accurately predicted was from a dark, gothic novel. As before there was Stephen King, the world's premier horror writer was Edgar Allan Poe. Though he preferred short stories, he did publish one novel known as The Narrative of Arthur Gordon Pym
Just
Nantucket,
straight up,
published in
Stephen King's
1838.
a
The
freaking
most
loon.
memorable scene in the book features a
I
crew
mean,
of
he's written
sailors
some
stranded
great
in the
stories,
ocean without food.
but the dude
The
is
men drew
loony
straws
as
to
the
decide which one of
jaybird.
them would be sacrificed to become a steak
He
meal
says
for
some
the others.
crazy
The
crap on
character
Twitter
who
all
lost
the
was known
time,
as Richard Parker.
but
But
makes
in a
no
stunning
sense.
coincidence, in 1884,
You know,
over
someone with
46
common
years
sense
later,
wouldn't
the
be
crew
talking
aboard the
like he
Mignonette
does.
ship found themselves in the
He's a
same
nut
situation
job.
after their boat sank in a terrible storm. Stranded without food in a lifeboat, the men had no hope for survival, until a 17-year-old crew member decided to drink salt water to quench his thirst. A fatal mistake to make, as
You
drinking salt
think?
water causes an excess of salt in your blood that your kidneys have to filter out with more
Yeah,
water.
you can't.
As a result, drinking seawater makes you even more dehydrated.
Yeah,
The
you
boys'
can't
health
drink
was rapidly
seawater.
deteriorating, and the sailors were very hungry. So they sacrificed
Oh,
food
they
for their
yeah,
meal instead.
they
The spookiest thing
cannibalized
of all
them.
was the boy's name, one Richard Parker. An impossibly creepy coincidence. Maybe Edgar Allan Poe had a vision of the future predicting these cannibal sailors. Although it's more likely that Richard Parker was just an incredibly common name at the time, one that these two happened to share. Still, I've got goosebumps from that real-life horror story. I sure do hope none of Stephen
Yeah,
King's
that's
novels predict the
crazy.
future. Otherwise, clowns at children's parties will never
I've
be the
heard
same again.
something similar to that before.
Which did you think was the strangest coincidence of all?
And that is the channel Be Amazed. They have some interesting stuff. He has some interesting stuff. And it's not always the same guy who narrates. Like there's another, one or two other guys that narrate for the channel sometimes. Check it out if you want. I think it's an okay channel. You know, they do sometimes, some of these fact channels get a few things wrong sometimes. Like at the beginning of this, there was no coincidence. You know, it was about diseases and crap. This historical, you know, the older diseases were historical fact. But, you know, it had some of the China V correct, but he didn't put in there all the crap that's come out lately that shows it was all a big lie. And, you know, most of them deaths were not related to China V. The doctors were just supposed to mark him that way for the hospitals to get money because the governments were paying them. It's just crazy. It's ridiculous. And the WHO and the CDC coming out and saying, hey, we lied. You didn't need to be locked down. Masks don't work. You know, it's literally 99% better that your body will naturally take care of it. You don't need the, you know, the vax. But whatever. You just gotta be careful. Sometimes they're not always, these, you know, fact channels are not always accurate about some of the things. But anyways, check it out. Be Amazed is alright. He has some pretty interesting stuff. I give it a thumbs up and a thumbs down. It's not bad. If you're looking for just something to watch, pass the time. Alright, everyone. Thank you for watching. Everyone take care. We'll see you on the next one.